The silence before applause of lights were bright, too bright. They didn't bother Sundar Pichai usually, but this time something felt different. The stage in Delhi was grand, filled with soft echoes of murmurs and coughs, thousands of seats, occupied by students, business leaders, journalists, and politicians. The hall carried the weight of expectation. Narendra Modi was seated on the front row, hands folded, his eyes calm but observant. He had just finished a strong address about technology, village development, and India's digital future. Now, all eyes were on Sundar. India's most admired tech son had returned for a keynote many believed would inspire a generation. But something unusual was happening inside him. Just before he was introduced, Sundar had received a short message on his phone. It was from his sister. Only 3 words. Emma is watching. His breath caught for a moment. His mother, Lakshmi Pichai, had never attended one of his speeches before. She had watched videos later, asked neighbors about what the big people said, but never, not once, had she come to watch her son speak live. And now she was here. He looked toward the 3rd row. She was sitting quietly in a simple green saree, her hair neatly tied, her eyes bright with emotion. She looked small next to the tall men in suits, but Sundar's heart swelled just looking at her. The announcer's voice echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Google CEO, Mr. Sundar Pichai." Applause thundered. Sundar walked to the podium slowly, clearing his throat. He had his speech ready, one about artificial intelligence, digital freedom, and the future of learning. But the paper in his hand suddenly felt weightless, even pointless. "Good evening," he began softly. "Today, I want to talk not just about technology, but about a person who shaped how I understand technology, humility, and strength." There was a pause. The hall went still. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists leaned forward. Even Modi ji sat straighter. Sundar's single quote's voice shook slightly. "Before Google, before computers, there was a small house in Chennai. 1 window, 2 fans, 1 radio, and a woman who walked 2 miles every day to get milk for her children." There was a silence so deep, even the sound of a pen dropping would have echoed. She never asked what I scored in maths. She only asked if I treated others kindly. She couldn't understand computers, but she understood what being human meant. He looked at Lakshmi in the crowd. She looked down, then smiled. But before Sundar could continue, something unexpected happened. Modi ji stood up slowly. The audience gasped. It was rare, very rare, for the Prime Minister to interrupt a speaker. Sundar stepped back in surprise. Even the security personnel shifted slightly, unsure what to do. Modi ji walked toward the stage. No one clapped. It wasn't the moment for that. He leaned toward Sundar, cupped his mouth gently with one hand, and whispered something only Sundar could hear. Sundar's eyes welled up instantly. He stepped away from the mic. His lips trembled. One hand covered his face as the tears came. Quiet, unplanned, and overwhelming. The hall was frozen, not from confusion, but from respect. What had the Prime Minister said? And why did it make Sundar cry? Modi ji placed one hand on Sundar's shoulder and looked at the audience. "Some achievements are measured in awards," he said softly, "but some are measured in how a son looks at his mother." With that, he turned and walked back to his seat. What followed wasn't applause. It wasn't shouting. It was a gentle standing ovation, slow and respectful, like the crowd understood. That's something far more important than a speech had just happened. And Lakshmi, she sat still, hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed as if praying. But inside her, there was a storm of emotion. 20 minutes later, Sundar returned to his seat, without finishing the original speech. The rest was not needed. What needed to be said had been said in silence. Later that evening, in the waiting room behind the stage, Lakshmi sat with a small still tiffin in her lap. She had brought homemade lemon rice for Sundar. "Emma," he said gently, "why today? After all these years, why today?" She smiled. "Because I thought you might forget where you started. But today I saw you never did." Sundar hugged her tightly, like a child. "Modi ji whispered something about you," he said. "He said she gave India more than a CEO. She gave us a good man." Lakshmi said nothing, but her eyes shone with tears. What no one knew, not Sundar, not the audience, not even Modi ji, was that Lakshmi had planned to quietly leave the hall before the speech ended. She had only wanted to see her son start. That was enough. She didn't like attention. But when Modi ji stood, everything changed. And this was only the beginning. The nation had seen a son cry, but they were yet to see what a mother had carried for decades, quietly and without complaint. The weight of a quiet woman's car ride back to the guest house was silent. Sundar sat beside his mother, the speech papers folded in his hands like they no longer mattered. The air inside the car was heavy but peaceful, like a quiet temple. Just after prayer, outside, traffic buzzed, people waved, reporters followed. But Sundar kept his eyes on his mother. Lakshmi Pichai didn't speak much. She had never needed to. Her presence alone spoke volumes. When Sundar was a boy, her silences were his safety. Now, even as a global figure, her silence still gave him strength. But tonight, something felt unfinished. What Modi ji had whispered kept ringing in Sundar's mind. She gave India more than a CEO. She gave us a good man. Those words had torn through something inside him, not in a painful way, but in a way that opened old doors. When they reached the guest house, Lakshmi slowly stepped out of the car. Sundar offered his arm. She refused it, gently. "I'm not that old yet," she said with a small smile, "but thank you, Kanna." Inside, she removed her sandals and walked toward the window. She always found the window first. In every hotel, in every room. She liked to sit there and look at the world quietly. Tonight was no different. Sundar made tea, the way she taught him when he was 12, more ginger, no sugared Amma. He said, handing her the cup, "Did you ever imagine this day would come?" She looked at him for a moment, her face calm. "I imagined a different one," she said. "Different how?" he asked. She sipped the tea slowly, her eyes staring into the dark sky outside. "I imagined one where Appa was here to see it." Those words dropped like stones in water. The room felt colder. Sundar's father, Raghunatha Pichai, had passed away quietly 5 years ago. A man of few words, he had been proud of Sundar, but never loud about it. He had worked long days as an electrical engineer. He would come home, wipe his face with a white towel, and sit in the corner listening to Carnatic music on the radio. "He believed in you," Lakshmi said softly, but he never believed in applause. Sundar looked at her. "I remember," he whispered. He once said, "Good work should echo, not scream." They both smiled, but soon the smile faded. Lakshmi placed her cup down. "Sundar," she said, her tone firm, "do you know what scares me?" He looked up, surprised. His mother rarely spoke of fear. "People think they know you," she continued, "but they only know your position, not your pain." He stayed silent. "You were a shy boy, scared of loud sounds," she said. "You hid behind me when guests came, and now you speak to millions. But somewhere, I still see that boy." Her words hit home. Sundar looked down at his hands. He didn't know how to respond. "Modi ji didn't praise you," she said. "He praised me, but not because I'm great. He praised what we carried, our silence, our sacrifice, our journey." Sundar nodded. "Amma, I know, and I want the world to know too." Lakshmi looked at him. "No, Kanna. Let them see only what they need. Not everything must be shared." But Sundar had already decided. That night, he opened his old laptop and began writing a letter. Not to the media, not for Google, but to the young dreamers in India. Those who came from simple homes like he did. Those whose mothers woke up before the sun and whose fathers went to bed after everyone else. The letter began. "Dear student sitting on the floor with one fan above. I see you. I was you." He shared stories he had never told. The day his mother pawned her gold chain so he could apply for a scholarship. The time his father walked 3 kilometers to find a second-hand textbook. The day they cried quietly in the kitchen when his U.S. visa was approved. But in the middle of writing, he paused. Something didn't feel right. He closed the laptop and walked to where his mother had fallen asleep on the sofa. He sat next to her, held her hand gently, and whispered, "Amma, do you want to go home to Chennai?" Her eyes opened slowly. "Yes," she said without hesitation. And just like that, the next day, without press, without cameras, without security, they flew back to the small house they once called home. When they arrived, the neighbors were shocked. Children ran out to see Sundar uncle. Old women looked from balconies. One lady started crying just seeing Lakshmi walk down the narrow lane. But Lakshmi, she smiled like nothing had changed. They entered the small house. It hadn't been touched. Sundar had kept it preserved. Same old fan, same wooden shelf, same faded wall paint. Lakshmi walked into the kitchen and touched the corner where she used to sit on the floor and cut vegetables. Do you remember? She said softly. This is where I taught you multiplication tables? Yes, Sundar said, eyes full. They sat in that corner again. This time, not to study, not to eat, just to sit and feel. Sundar pulled out his phone and took a photo. It wasn't for social media. It was for him, for memory. As the day turned, the evening, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. A young girl, about 16, stood there nervously. Her uniform was torn at the edges. She held a notebook in her hand. Is it true? She asked shakily. Did you really grow up here? Sundar nodded. Double quotes. And your mother, she used to walk to school with you? Lakshmi laughed softly. Only. When he cried too much, the girl's eyes filled with tears. Then maybe I can become something too? Sundar bent down to her level. You already are, he said. You just don't know it yet. And Lakshmi? She handed the girl a small silver pen. Write your dreams, she said. Don't speak them. Write them. Let the ink do the shouting. As the girl left, she turned and said something that stayed with Sundar for a long time. If your mother could raise you here, then maybe my Amma can raise someone like me too. That night, Sundar sat beside his mother again. Amma, he said, you were right. Not everything must be shared, but maybe, just maybe, some stories deserve to be lived again. Lakshmi smiled, leaned back, and whispered, yes, but only with clean hands and full hearts. Outside, the streetlight flickered. Children laughed. In a lane, and somewhere, deep in the city's breath, a small dream took shape inside another quiet home. A whisper at sunrise of morning light entered the small house in Chennai softly, gently resting on the worn floor tiles like an old friend. Sundar had forgotten how warm the sunlight felt here, not the cold white light of California glass offices, but the golden, earthy kind that filtered through thin curtains and smelled like old dust and comfort. His mother had already been up for an hour. She had gone to the temple down the street, carrying a small bag of flowers and a copper bowl of water. She walked without shoes, quietly, nodding at neighbors. No one disturbed her, not because she was the mother of a global CEO, but because she had always walked this way. Nothing had changed about her path, only the world around her had shifted. Sundar stood at the doorway, watching. When she returned, she placed the bowl on the kitchen shelf and looked at him. You didn't sleep well, she said. I was thinking, he replied, about. He hesitated. About everything I've done and everything I haven't. She sat down, patting the floor beside her. Then let's think together. Sundar joined her, legs crossed like a child. He looked around the kitchen, still the same water tap, same stove, same smell of old steel containers. Do you remember, he said, when I told you I wanted to leave for the U.S. and you didn't speak to me for 2 days? Lakshmi nodded. I was angry, yes, not because you were leaving, but because you were leaving so quietly. He smiled. I didn't want to make you sad. You didn't, she replied. You made me proud, but also scared. Scared of what? Scared that success would change your heart. Sundar's smile faded. And did it? He asked. She looked into his eyes. Not yet. He exhaled. But, she added, the world will keep trying. They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Sundar spoke. Amma, there's something else, something I didn't tell you. She turned to him gently. When Modi ji whispered about you on stage, I realized something. The world looks at me as a leader, but I have always been following your footsteps, quietly, without telling you. Lakshmi's eyes didn't blink. When you held the family together after Appa lost his job, when you smiled even though we couldn't afford a fan during summer, when you fasted during exam season, just so I could have 1 extra glass of milk, I noticed everything. Her hands folded in her lap, but she said nothing. I wanted to thank you in front of the world, Sundar continued, but I didn't know how. Lakshmi looked away, her voice soft. Then don't do it for the world. Do it for the girl who came yesterday. He nodded slowly. I want to build something here. Build what? She asked. He stood and walked to the other room. A moment later, he returned with a notepad. He opened it and showed her the sketch. It was a drawing of a small learning center. Nothing big, 1 floor, open walls, shaded courtyard with bookshelves, and computers and mats for students to sit. At the center of it, a plaque that simply read, for the mother who walked, so her son could run. Lakshmi covered her mouth in shock. I don't want it to have my name, Sundar said. I want it to be hers. Every mother who works in silence, who raises dreamers. Tears formed in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them and smiled. Then let's begin, she whispered. Asterisk, the news spread quietly at first. A tech billionaire was funding a school in a narrow lane in Chennai. Not a massive Google-backed building, not a university, not even a startup hub, just a learning center beside a temple. Some media tried to cover it with flashy headlines. CEO gives back, from Silicon Valley to Chennai streets. But Sundar avoided all interviews. He wanted it quiet. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no speeches. Only students. And slowly, the street began to change. Workers came. Paint was refreshed. Wires were fixed. The old broken bench where Lakshmi used. The wait for Sundar after school was replaced by a new one. But she made sure they left the same tree beside it. Some memories must stay, she said. Then, one day, as construction neared completion, a letter arrived. It was from a girl in Guwahati. Awesome. Dear sir, I saw a video where you cried on stage for your mother. My father is gone. My mother makes tea in a railway station. People laugh at her, but I don't. Now I want to study hard. Maybe one day I'll also make her proud. Your friend, Mira. Sundar folded the letter and placed it in his wallet. He didn't respond publicly. But he called his team and asked them to track the girl quietly, offer her a scholarship, and ensure her mother received monthly support, with no publicity attached. He knew what it felt like to carry big dreams in a small bag. Asterisk, the center opened on a Tuesday morning. Lakshmi stood at the doorway, holding a bowl of rice and turmeric. Sundar stood beside her. A few neighborhood children were already seated inside, cross-legged, staring at the shiny tablets on the table. Lakshmi walked around, applying small dots of turmeric paste on each wall, blessing the corners. What shall we call it? Sundar asked. She thought for a moment. Then she said, call it Emma's room. He smiled. Done. As they sat under the neem tree outside, Lakshmi leaned against the bench and looked at the children. See that girl in the corner? She said, the one with the scar near her eyebrow. Yes, she reminds me of you, she said. Always thinking, always scared to speak, but always listening. Sundar nodded. I'll talk to her later. Lakshmi looked at him. No, she said, don't talk, just listen. Some children open up when they're heard, not when they're asked. He sat back. For the next hour, they simply watched. No announcements, no noise, just books opening, fingers tapping gently, a bird chirping. And somewhere deep in the quiet, Sundar realized something. He had spoken at global forums. He had met presidents and visionaries. But this tiny school with 10 students and one neem tree was the loudest speech he had ever given. Asterisk, that evening, Modi ji called. I heard what you built, he said. Sundar smiled. Nothing big, sir. Just something small with a big heart. The biggest things, Modi ji said, often begin small and with mothers. They paused for a moment. Then Modi ji said, one day, I want to visit. Quietly. You'll be most welcome, Sundar replied. And one more thing, the Prime Minister added. Tell your mother, India sees her now and listens. Sundar looked at his mother sitting quietly by the kitchen window, cutting vegetables. He smiled and said, Sir, she already knows. She always did. When silence becomes a teacher, sun rose slowly over Chennai, casting long shadows through the small windows of Emma's room. The soft scent of turmeric and new books still lingered in the air. Birds sang from the neem tree outside, and inside, the children sat quietly on the mats, eyes wide, hearts open. Lakshmi Pichai entered with a small steel plate of warm idlis, just like she used to make for Sundar decades ago. She wore a simple cotton saree, her hair tied in the same bun, her steps unhurried. The children looked up and smiled. She didn't speak. She simply placed the plate down on the corner table and sat beside the youngest girl, who hadn't said a word since she had joined 2 days ago. The girl's name was Kavya. She was 7. Her father had disappeared during the floods, and her mother cleaned houses nearby. Kavya didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just sat, head down, hands locked together tightly. Lakshmi placed her hand gently on Kavya's back. Do you like stories? She asked softly. Kavya didn't answer, but her eyes moved slightly. That was enough. Lakshmi began. Once there was a little sparrow, very quiet, very shy. She lived on a tree like this one, she said, pointing outside. One day, a storm came. All the big birds flew away, but the sparrow stayed, not because she was brave, but because she had nowhere else to go. Kavya looked up. What happened to her? She asked in a whisper. Lakshmi smiled. The storm passed, and when the sun returned, she was still there. And all the other birds came back and said, "You're not small, you're strong." The room was silent. And then Kavya did something no one had seen before. She smiled. Asterisk outside. Sundar watched through the window. He had seen powerful people speak on the world's biggest stages, but never had he seen such power in silence. His mother hadn't just opened the center. She had opened the door. That day, he sat with his team from Google India and made a quiet decision. What we did here, he said, we'll do it again, in other cities, other villages, but with one rule: no big names, no photos, just mothers and learning. They nodded. Lakshmi, standing behind the curtain, heard everything. She smiled, but said nothing. Asterisk. A few weeks passed. Children kept coming. Some stayed, some left, but every child who walked into Emma's room left with something more than knowledge. They left with dignity. One afternoon, a man in a formal suit arrived at the gate. He looked confused. Is this the Google school? He asked. Lakshmi looked up from her chair. No, she said. This is Emma's room. But isn't this funded by your son, the CEO? Lakshmi shook her head. This is funded by hunger, she said, and hope. The rest is just help. The man stood silently. Then he turned and left. Asterisk. Meanwhile, Sundar was asked to speak at a major event in Delhi again. This time, international leaders were coming. And again, Modi-ji would be attending. Sundar wasn't sure if he wanted to go. What will I say that hasn't already been said? He asked his mother. Lakshmi looked at him and replied, then don't say something new. Say something true. He thought about it all night. The next morning, he packed his bag and flew to Delhi. Asterisk. The event was grand. Tall banners, hundreds of media cameras, rows of important guests. Sundar walked in simply, without security, without an entourage. He sat quietly in his seat until it was time. When his name was called, he walked up slowly, looking at the rows of faces. So many powerful people, but so many tired ones too. Some looked like they wanted a break from pretending to be important. He cleared his throat. I was told to speak about the future of global technology, he began. But what is the future if we don't remember the past? The audience listened closely. I grew up in a home where we shared a phone line with our neighbor, where our fridge was smaller than this podium, and where every morning my mother packed lunch for 5 people before sunrise. And today, that same mother teaches children in a small learning center in Chennai, not because she's a teacher, but because she never stopped learning. The camera zoomed in. People stopped checking their phones. When I was small, I used to think the strongest person in the world was my father. Later, I realized it was my mother. A quiet hum moved through the crowd. She taught me that real success is not measured by titles, but by tenderness, not by awards, but by awareness, not by how high you climb, but by who you lift. And then, he did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded letter, and read aloud, Dear Sir, I saw a video where you cried on stage for your mother. It was Mira's letter. By the time he finished reading it, there were tears in many eyes. Sundar folded the letter gently, placed it back in his pocket, and said, I will never know how many children like Mira are out there. But if each of us can light one lamp, maybe they won't feel so alone in the dark. Applause followed. But the loudest part of the speech wasn't the applause. It was the moment of complete silence that came after. A silence of understanding. Silence of truth. A silence that healed. That evening, back in Chennai, Lakshmi sat at the edge of her bed listening to the speech on the radio. When it ended, she didn't clap. She just closed her eyes and whispered. He remembered. The next morning, something strange happened. Lakshmi found a small envelope tucked under the main gate. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of a neem tree and a line written in broken Tamil. AMMA. Can you teach me to? There was no name, no return address, but Lakshmi didn't ask anyone who left it. She simply placed the picture on the wall of Emma's room beside a photo of her and young Sundar. She looked at the children inside and said, We have one more student. They just haven't arrived yet, and the children nodded. They understood. Asterisk, asterisk, the seeds had been planted. Not by wealth. Not by fame, but by a mother who once walked 2 miles in the heat for a glass of milk, and a son who never forgot what that milk had cost. The letter that reached the Prime Minister Manson arrived early that year. The skies over Chennai turned gray, and rainwater danced across the narrow streets like it remembered every corner it had touched before. Inside Emma's room, the roof creaked softly, but the children remained dry. Their laughter echoed beneath the metal sheets as they read stories, solved puzzles, and watched videos on the small tablets Sundar had donated. Lakshmi Pichai sat in her usual place beside the window, her hands busy stitching an old cloth bag. She wasn't a teacher by training, but the children came to her with questions anyway. She answered the way she always had, with patience, with gentleness, and without judgment. Outside, Sundar stood silently under the neem tree, watching. He had returned without any announcement. No guards, no calls, no press, just a quiet return. After the speech in Delhi that had reached hearts far beyond the room, Modi ji had sent a handwritten note the day after. Your words were not just heard, they were felt. India doesn't just need dreamers, it needs memory keepers, and your mother is one. Sundar had shown the note to Lakshmi. She had smiled and tucked it between the pages of her old Tamil prayer book. I will keep it, she said, not because it's from a prime minister, but because it's from someone who listened. Asterisk, asterisk, that day, a storm was coming, not from the sky but from the past. A boy named Raju, barely 11, had stopped coming to Emma's room for a week. When he finally returned, his shirt was torn and his eyes carried something dark. Lakshmi called him aside and asked gently, Raju, where were you? He looked down. My father came back. She knew what that meant. Raju's father had been missing for months. When he returned, he brought with him old anger and no money. The boy had been forced to work in a mechanic's shed all day, returning home with bruises and silence. Sundar sat beside Raju and placed a hand on his shoulder. Do you want to study? He asked. Raju nodded. Then we'll fix this, Sundar said. Lakshmi looked at him, concerned. We can't interfere in homes. Canna, she said quietly. We're only guests in these children's lives. Not this time, Sundar replied. He went back to his laptop that night and wrote a letter, not in the mail, not a pressed note, but an actual letter on paper. He wrote it from the voice of a child who could not speak, to the ears of a leader who once sold tea on railway platforms. He addressed it to Prime Minister Modi ji. The letter read, Dear Sir, I am not a voter. Not yet. I don't know laws. I don't know big words. But I know hunger. I know fear. I know what it means when your home becomes a place you want to run away from. My name is Raju. But today, my name is also Lakshmi's son. She fed me when I was hungry. She listened when I was silent. Please help her help more children like me. Because sometimes Emma is not the one who gives birth. Sometimes she's the one who holds your hand when no one else does. Sundar read it aloud to Lakshmi. She said nothing for a while. Then she asked, Do you think you'll read it? He has read more painful letters, Sundar replied, but maybe this one will remind him of something softer. Asterisk, asterisk, 10 days later, a white car arrived outside Emma's room. 2 officials stepped out, quietly and without fuss. We're from the Prime Minister's office. One of them said, and we're not here for pictures. We're here to listen. They sat cross-legged inside the learning center, listened to Lakshmi, spoke to the children, and ate the same rice porridge everyone else had. Before leaving, one officer turned to Lakshmi and said, He read the letter. He wants to help, but only if you agree. Help how? She asked. By turning this into something bigger. More rooms, more teachers, more reach. Lakshmi shook her head. Only if it stays small in spirit, she said. I don't want big buildings. I want big hearts. They nodded. Asterisk, asterisk. In the weeks that followed, Emma's room quietly became the center of a national pilot program. Sundar helped shape it, but always in the background. The focus remained on simple values: listening, feeding, teaching, and protecting. No school uniforms, no strict bells, just community, care, and quiet support. Lakshmi trained a few neighborhood mothers to join as volunteers. She taught them not how to teach, but how to notice. Look at their shoes, she said. See if they're worn. Look at their eyes. See if they're tired. Notice their hands. Notice if they've stopped drawing. One mother asked, and then Lakshmi replied. Then give them food and ask nothing. One evening, as the rain poured outside, Sundar found a folded note in his old bedroom. It was written by his father long ago. The paper had yellowed, the ink slightly faded. Dear Sundar, you will grow far, maybe even fly, but when the world claps for you, remember the silence behind your applause. That silence is your Amma. That silence is us. He held the note for a long time. Then he walked to the main room, where Lakshmi was rolling chapatis for the children's dinner. He placed the note beside her silently. She didn't read it. She just placed a hand over it and nodded. As if to say, I already know what it says. A few weeks later, Modi ji made an unannounced visit to Chennai. It wasn't political. It wasn't planned. He arrived without cameras, without speeches, and he came alone. Sundar met him at the gate. I told you I'd visit quietly, Modi ji said with a soft smile. They walked inside. The children didn't even recognize him at first. He sat down with them, helped one girl tie her shoelaces, and watched another draw a picture of a tree. Lakshmi came out slowly, wiping her hands on her SARE. Modi ji stood up. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then he said softly, Thank you, not just for him. He nodded toward Sundar, but for all of them. Lakshmi folded her hands and said, I only did what any Amma would do. He smiled. Before leaving, Modi ji placed a small brass bell on the front table. Ring it, he said, whenever the silence gets too loud. Lakshmi smiled. I prefer silence. It teaches better than noise. He laughed gently. And then he left. That night, the children gathered around Sundar under the neem tree. Will Amma's room become a big school now? One of them asked. Sundar looked at his mother. Lakshmi replied, No, it will become a small home in many hearts. And the children smiled. They understood. Rayu sat beside her, holding a notebook. Amma, he said, Can I write a story? Of course, she replied. About what? Rayu looked around. Then he said, About a mother who never shouted, but everyone still heard her. Lakshmi's eyes filled quietly. That, she whispered, will be a very good story. When the world sat at her feet, neem tree stood still, tall above Amma's room, its branches swaying gently in the wind. It had seen everything, children learning under its shade, mothers weeping quietly in corners, Sundar sweeping the front yard before the kids arrived, and Lakshmi folding chapatis with love and rhythm, as if each one held a lesson inside. Months had passed since the letter to the Prime Minister. The center now welcomed children from distant neighborhoods, some even brought by fathers who once didn't believe in too much education. Something had shifted, not because of force, not because of power, but because of trust. The small plaque outside the building read, in honor of every mother who stayed silent, so her child could speak. And people came. But one morning, something unusual happened. A car arrived, sleek, black, with a small Indian flag on it. A quiet man stepped out and spoke softly to Sundar, who was fixing a broken ceiling fan. There's a woman, he said, from another country, very important. She wants to meet Amma. Sundar wiped his hands and looked toward the kitchen where his mother was pouring milk into steel glasses. Who is she? He asked. She is a world leader, the man replied, but she doesn't want cameras. She only wants a few words. Sundar nodded, then let her come in like everyone else. No red carpet, no chairs, just the floor. An hour later, she came. The president of a powerful country, one whose name made headlines. But here, she removed her shoes, folded her hands, and entered Amma's room with humility. Lakshmi didn't stand up. She just smiled and pointed to the floor beside her. Sit, she said. The floor is cool. It teaches balance. And so she sat. They spoke in soft voices. The woman asked, How did you raise a son who didn't forget you? Lakshmi looked down, smiled gently, and replied, I raised him like a seed, not with lectures, but with light. The woman nodded. And how did you stay so simple? Lakshmi thought for a moment, then said, Because simplicity is not poverty, it is clarity. When you know who you are, you don't have to decorate it. Later, when she left, she turned to Sundar and whispered, The world teaches leadership from stages, but she teaches it from silence. Thank you for letting me sit with her. That evening, news had already begun to spread. Not because Lakshmi wanted it, but because word of mouth had wings. Lakshmi was invited to speak at a National Mothers Forum. She declined. A documentary team requested to film her daily routine. She refused. A university wanted to name a lecture hall after her. She said no. When Sundar asked why, she replied, "If they name a room after me, who will name the mothers who have no sons on stage?" He understood. So instead, he came up with a quiet idea. He built a website. No pictures, no biography, only one button. Submit a story about your AMMA. Within 2 weeks, over 70,000 people had written in stories from fishermen villages, from hill towns, from tribal areas, from city slums. Each one was a love letter to a mother who had sacrificed something quietly. Lakshmi read 10 stories each night. Some made her cry, some made her laugh, and some reminded her of her own past. One day, she called Sundar and said, "Can we invite some of them here?" "Who?" he asked. "Some of the mothers. Not famous ones, just real ones." So they did. 40 mothers from across India came to Emma's room. They arrived in auto rickshaws, old buses, and shared jeeps. None had ever been on a flight. Most didn't even own a phone. But they came, and when they entered the room, Lakshmi greeted each one with a smile and a fresh garland. She made them sit in a circle, and she asked only one question: "What did you give up for your child?" The answers came slowly. "I sold my sewing machine. I skipped medicine for 3 years. I ate once a day for months. I walked 10 kilometers daily to send her to school." No one cried loudly. But every eye was wet. Lakshmi then stood up slowly and said, "You all are me, and I am you." Sundar watched from the side. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. This was not his stage. This was theirs. Weeks later, Lakshmi fell slightly ill. A fever. Nothing serious. But Sundar panicked like any son. "Emma, let's go." "To the hospital," he urged. She shook her head. "No need." But he insisted. At the hospital, the doctor greeted her like royalty. "We know who you are, Emma," he said. "You've changed more lives than most of us." Lakshmi smiled. "I've only fed hungry children." The doctor replied, "And that is more than enough." As she recovered, a letter arrived. This time, not from a child, but from a man once known for numbers, policies, and international speeches. It was Modi ji. His handwriting was careful. "Dear Emma, when I met you, I thought I was meeting a mother, but now I understand. I was meeting a movement. In every street where a child studies because of you, India grows stronger. In every home where a woman finds courage through your story, the nation becomes gentler. You have done more in silence than many do with microphones. Thank you for being our example." Lakshmi placed the letter beside her prayer book, next to the first one. One final moment remained. A ceremony was being planned secretly. To honor her, the President of India herself wanted to visit and give her the nation's highest civilian award. But when Lakshmi heard, she said, "I will not come." They asked why. She said, "If you really want to honor me, then go to one village and feed every mother for a day. That will be my medal." And so, on one single day across India, thousands of mothers received a meal, quietly handed to them by volunteers who simply said, "This is from Emma." Lakshmi sat in her kitchen that day, watching rain fall. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for more recognition. Not for health. But for strength. May no mother feel invisible. She whispered, even when she walks alone. As night fell, Sundar walked into the room with a notebook. "What is it?" she asked. "The story of you." He said. "Is it finished?" she asked. He smiled. "No, it's still being written. Every time a child sits on a mat, or a mother shares a meal, or someone says thank you in silence, another line is added." She nodded. "Then keep writing," she said, "but never make it about me. Make it about us." And with that, the woman the world had come to call Emma sat back, as always, with folded hands, steady eyes, and a heart so full it had made room for a nation. The day she disappeared, quiet lied, neem tree stood still, but it felt different now. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was because the person who used to sit under it every morning, watching the children enter Emma's room, wasn't there. Lakshmi Pichai had not come that morning. Not for the morning prayer, not to boil milk, not to fold the floor mats. At first, the children waited. Then Sundar arrived, early and worried. He knew something wasn't right, not because she had told him, But because the kitchen was the quiet dot, he opened the door to her room. She was sitting upright in her chair, eyes closed, a calm smile on her face. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had left the world the same way she had lived in it. Softly. Without a sound, news spread slowly because no one believed it. At first, no, one mother said, "She was here just yesterday. She gave me oil for my hair," another girl whispered, and said she'd teach me a new story today. But the chair was empty. And the neem tree didn't move. Sundar didn't cry that day. Not because he wasn't broken, but because he didn't know how to cry in front of so many children who had already lost one Amma before, and now felt like they had lost another. He simply walked outside, sat under the neem tree, and waited. He thought she might return from the temple, holding flowers, telling him he was worrying for nothing. But the wind said otherwise. Modi Ji called later that day. He didn't speak much. He just said, "A moment of silence won't be enough." And he was right. 3 days later, Lakshmi was buried quietly in the corner of the land behind Amma's room. She had once said, "If I must leave, let it be close to the laughter of children." So that's where she rested, under a small guava tree, no grand stone, no fence, just a stone with her name scratched softly, Lakshmi, who taught the world without a mick. Sundar didn't leave Chennai for a long time. He sat every day beside the guava tree. Children came, sat beside him, some silent, some curious. One day, little Kavya, now older, brought him a small box. "I found this in Amma's cupboard," she said. Inside was a diary. Not a fancy one, just a soft-bound notebook with ink stains and folded pages. He opened it. The first page read, "I did not become famous. I became useful, and that was enough." Each page had notes, thoughts, recipes, prayers, but more than anything, hopes. Hopes for the girls to go to school, hopes for the boys to learn gentleness, hopes that no child would ever be too hungry to dream. On the last page, in her neat but aging handwriting, she had written, "If anyone reads this after I am gone, feed them first, then let them sit under the tree." Then read this, "You are always loved." Sundar closed the book and placed it on the highest shelf in Amma's room. The years passed, but Amma's room remained. No matter how many schools Sundar helped build after that, no matter how many countries he traveled to, he always returned here. To the neem tree, to the bench. To the silence. One day, he brought his daughter, a quiet, curious girl who loved drawing. He walked her into Amma's room. She looked around and asked, "Who was Amma?" He sat on the floor with her and said, "She was the reason I could ever stand." His daughter reached out and touched the plaque outside. Then she drew a picture in her notebook. A tree. A small woman in a sari sitting on a bench, and dozens of children sitting on the floor. Smiling. Below it, she wrote, "She is not gone. She became the soiled on what would have been her 80th birthday. The President of India visited quietly, as Lakshmi had once wished. There were no speeches, no decorations, just 30 mothers who cooked meals for the children that day, and a brass lamp that burned for hours beside her tree. Sundar lit the lamp himself. Someone asked, "What now?" He looked around. At the children. At the mothers. At the wind moving through the leaves. And he said, "Now we live like she did, quiet, strong, and kind." As evening fell, the last student of the day closed the gate. The neem tree stood still. A soft voice seemed to pass through the wind. "You were always loved." And in the heart of a small street in Chennai, beneath the shade of memory and the roots of love, Amma's room stayed open, not because of walls. But because of all the hearts that refused to close.